The Frostborns Vow. Talia Corvin never feared the cold until it spoke to her. The town of Hollowmere had always whispered of the Frostborn King, the one who would rise when the first snowfall arrived in summer. She had laughed at their fears until the lake froze solid overnight. The wind carried a voice not meant for human ears. And then she saw him, standing in the storm, silver-eyed, breath curling in the frozen air. "You were meant for winter," he murmured. "And winter has come to claim you." Chapter 1. The Unseasonal Chill. The air, thick with the promise of a late July sunset, carried a scent that Talia Corvin couldn't quite place. It wasn't the familiar, comforting aroma of pine needles and damp earth that usually clung to the air in Hollowmere, the small town nestled deep within the Whisperwood Mountains. This was something sharper, colder, a premonition of winter in the heart of summer. Talia, perched on the weathered porch swing of her grandmother's old Victorian house, shivered, pulling her worn, knitted shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was an instinctive reaction, one she'd honed over 57 years of living, but this chill felt different, deeper, burrowing into her bones with an unsettling persistence. "Nonsense, Talia," she muttered to herself, her voice a low, husky murmur that was often mistaken for gruffness. "Just the mountain air." But even as she spoke the words, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She'd lived in Hollowmere her entire life, inherited the house and a certain sensitivity from her grandmother, Alara. Alara, who had warned her about the whispers of the mountains, the old magic that clung to the ancient peaks like a shroud. Magic Talia had always dismissed as folklore, the ramblings of an old woman clinging to the past. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, casting long, dancing shadows across the overgrown garden. Normally, this was Talia's favorite time of day, a moment of quiet reflection before the night crept in. She'd sit here, sipping her chamomile tea, listening to the crickets chirp their evening song, and lose herself in the familiar rhythm of the mountains. Tonight, however, the beauty felt tainted, somehow. The vibrant colors seemed to clash with the unnatural chill, creating a dissonance that grated on her nerves. A sudden gust of wind, shockingly cold, whipped through the garden, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak tree that stood sentinel beside the porch. The wind chimes, crafted from seashells Alara had collected decades ago, clattered together with a frantic, almost desperate sound. Talia's hand flew to the silver locket she always wore, a delicate piece shaped like a snowflake, another inheritance from her grandmother. It felt unusually cold against her skin. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to center herself. Talia was a practical woman, a retired librarian who prided herself on her logic and reason. She dealt in facts, in the tangible world of books and history. Yet ever since her husband, Thomas, had passed away 5 years ago, a part of her, a hidden, dormant part, had begun to stir. A sense of waiting, of something inevitable approaching. The feeling intensified over the past few weeks. It started subtly, with a persistent feeling of being watched, the occasional flicker of movement in the periphery of her vision. Then came the dreams, vivid and unsettling, filled with swirling snow, icy landscapes, and a pair of eyes, impossibly silver, that seemed to pierce through the darkness. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, the lingering scent of frost clinging to the air. "You're letting your grief get the better of you, Talia," she'd told herself repeatedly. Loneliness could play tricks on the mind, she reasoned. But the chill in the air tonight felt undeniably real, a physical manifestation of the unease that had taken root deep within her soul. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the distant peaks of the Whisperwood Mountains. They were shrouded in an unusual mist, a thick, swirling fog that seemed to defy the warm summer air. The mist glowed with an unnatural luminescence, reflecting the dying light of the sun in an eerie, almost otherworldly way. A shiver, stronger this time, ran down her spine. It wasn't just the cold, it was a feeling of presence, of something ancient and powerful stirring in the heart of the mountains. Something that was drawing closer, inexorably, to Hollowmere. And to her. From the kitchen, The old grandfather clock chimed 7 times, its deep, resonant tones echoing through the silent house. Talia rose from the swing, her joints protesting with a familiar ache. She was no longer the young woman who had climbed those mountains with Thomas, exploring hidden trails and sharing whispered secrets under the vast, starlit sky. Time and grief had taken their toll. But as she stepped inside, closing the heavy oak door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something fundamental had changed. The familiar comfort of her home felt fragile, as if it were standing on the precipice of something unknown, something terrifying and beautiful. She touched the cold, silver surface of her locket again, a question forming and burning at her thoughts, a premonition she couldn't quite grasp, a whisper on the wind that spoke of a winter that was not of this world. What was that? Chapter 2. Whispers on the Wind. The grandfather clock's final chime faded into the stillness of the house, leaving Talia enveloped in a silence that felt heavier than usual. The scent of lavender and old books, the familiar aromas of her life, did little to soothe the growing unease that coiled in her chest. She moved through the house, her movements automatic, lighting the oil lamps that cast a warm, flickering glow against the aged wallpaper. The house was a repository of memories, each object holding a story, a whisper of the past. A framed photograph on the mantelpiece caught her eye. It was a picture of her and Thomas, taken on their wedding day. He was smiling, his eyes crinkled at the corners, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. She remembered the feel of his hand, strong and reassuring, the warmth of his presence a constant in her life. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, washed over her. She traced the outline of his face with a trembling finger, a familiar ache settling in her heart. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What's happening?" The wind, still unusually strong for a summer night, howled outside, rattling the window panes. It sounded almost mournful, a low, keening sound that sent shivers down her spine. Talia had always been attuned to the wind, a trait she'd inherited from Alara. Her grandmother had claimed that the wind carried the voices of the mountains, the whispers of the old spirits. Talia had always dismissed it as superstition, but tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that the wind was trying to tell her something. She moved to the window, peering out into the gathering darkness. The mist that clung to the mountains had thickened, obscuring the peaks entirely. It swirled and eddied, a living, breathing entity that seemed to press against the town, suffocating it in a blanket of cold, white silence. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the deserted streets. Hollowmere, usually bustling with activity even at this hour, felt eerily deserted. A sudden movement caught her eye. A figure, tall and cloaked, was walking down the street, their form barely visible in the swirling mist. Talia squinted, trying to get a better look. The figure seemed to glide rather than walk, their movements fluid and graceful, almost unnatural. As they passed under a flickering streetlight, a flash of silver caught her eye. Hair, perhaps, or a piece of jewelry. The figure paused, their head turning as if they sensed her gaze. Talia felt a jolt of fear, a primal instinct to hide, to run. But she stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes locked on the figure in the mist. For a long moment, they stood there, staring at each other across the distance. Then, the figure raised a hand, a slow, deliberate gesture, as if beckoning her. Talia gasped, stepping back from the window. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted, a cold wave that washed over her. She stumbled backward, knocking against a small table, sending a porcelain figurine crashing to the floor. The sound, sharp and loud in the otherwise silent house, seemed to shatter the spell that had held her captive. She scrambled to pick up the broken pieces, her hands shaking. It was a figurine of a wolf, a gift from Thomas, a reminder of their many hikes through the Whisperwood Mountains. The wolf had always been a symbol of their love, of their shared connection to the wild, untamed beauty of the wilderness. Now, it lay shattered on the floor, a broken omen of what was to come. The wind continued to howl, its mournful cry echoing through the house. Talia could no longer deny the truth. Something was happening in Hollowmere, something unnatural, something connected to the strange chill, the swirling mist, and the figure in the street. And she, somehow, was caught in the middle of it. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. She needed to think, to find a logical explanation for what she had seen. But logic seemed to have deserted her, replaced by a growing sense of dread, a feeling that she was standing on the edge of an abyss, about to be plunged into a world she didn't understand. A whisper, barely audible, seemed to brush against her ear. It was faint, carried on the wind, but she could have sworn she heard a voice, cold and melodic, speaking her name. Talia, she whirled around, her eyes darting around the room. She was alone. The house was silent, except for the creaking of the old timbers and the howling of the wind. But the whisper lingered in the air, a chilling reminder that she was not alone, that something was watching her, waiting for her. The cold seemed to deepen, seeping into the very walls of the house, a tangible presence that threatened to consume her. What was that voice, and why did it sound familiar? Chapter 3. The Frozen Lake. Sleep eluded Talia. The whisper, the chilling image of the figure in the mist, and the unsettling feeling of being watched replayed in her mind, a relentless loop that kept her tossing and turning in her bed. The old house creaked and groaned around her, the sounds amplified by the unnatural silence of the town. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat, every gust of wind a whispered warning. Finally, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky a pale, washed-out gray, she gave up on sleep. She rose, her body stiff and aching, her mind still racing. She dressed quickly, pulling on a thick wool sweater and her sturdy hiking boots. She needed to get out of the house, to breathe fresh air, to try to make sense of the unsettling events of the previous night. Her destination was clear. Mirror Lake, a small, secluded body of water nestled at the foot of the Whisperwood Mountains. It was a place of peace and tranquility, a place where she had often gone with Thomas to escape the pressures of everyday life. She hoped that the familiar surroundings would help to calm her frayed nerves, to offer some clarity to her confused thoughts. As she stepped outside, she was struck by the unnatural stillness of the morning. There were no birds singing, no sounds of traffic, no signs of life. The air was thick with the same chilling mist that had blanketed the town the previous night, obscuring the surrounding landscape. It felt as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The walk to the lake was shorter than she remembered, or perhaps it was just the urgency of her steps that made it seem so. As she approached the clearing where the lake lay nestled, a sense of dread washed over her. The air grew even colder, the mist thicker, swirling around her like a living entity. And then she saw it. Mirror Lake, usually a shimmering expanse of crystal-clear water reflecting the surrounding mountains, was frozen solid. A thick layer of ice covered its surface, gleaming with an unnatural, almost ethereal light. It was impossible. It was the height of summer. The temperature had been well above freezing the previous day. Lakes didn't freeze overnight in July. Talia stood at the edge of the frozen lake, her breath catching in her throat. The sight was both terrifying and strangely beautiful. The ice was perfectly smooth, reflecting the gray sky above like a mirror. It seemed to stretch on forever, an endless expanse of frozen stillness. She took a tentative step onto the ice, testing its strength. It held firm, solid beneath her boots. She walked further, her footsteps echoing across the frozen surface. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the ice and the faint whisper of the wind. As she reached the center of the lake, she noticed something embedded in the ice. A single, white feather, frozen in place, its delicate structure perfectly preserved. It was a large feather, unlike any she had seen before. It seemed to glow with an inner light, radiating a faint warmth that contrasted with the surrounding cold. She knelt down, reaching out to touch the feather. As her fingers brushed against its surface, a jolt of energy surged through her, a sudden rush of warmth that spread through her entire body. Images flashed through her mind, vivid and fragmented, a swirling snowstorm, a towering figure with silver eyes, a whispered promise. She recoiled, pulling her hand back as if she had been burned. The images faded, leaving her disoriented and breathless. She stood up, her legs trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind picked up, swirling the mist around her. She could hear the whispers again, louder this time, clearer. They seemed to be coming from the ice itself, from the depths of the frozen lake. To Leah, the voice was the same one she had heard the previous night, cold and melodic, yet strangely familiar. It spoke her name with a possessive tone, a hint of something ancient and powerful. And then she saw him. He emerged from the mist, walking towards her across the frozen lake. He was tall and imposing, his figure cloaked in dark furs, his silver hair gleaming in the pale light. His eyes, the same silver eyes that had haunted her dreams, locked onto hers, holding her captive in their gaze. He moved with an unnatural grace, his footsteps silent on the ice. He was the figure from her street, the one in her dreams, and the source of the unsettling chill that had gripped Hollowmere. He was real, and he was coming for her. Chapter 4. Silver Eyes in the Storm. He stopped a few feet away, the swirling mist framing his figure like a halo. The air around him crackled with an energy that Talia could feel, a palpable force that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. He was even more striking up close, his features sharp and defined, his skin pale, almost translucent, as if he were carved from ice himself. But it was his eyes that held her captive, those impossibly silver eyes that seemed to see right through her, stripping away her defenses, laying bare her soul. "Talia Corvin," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that echoed across the frozen lake. It was the same voice she had heard in the whispers, the voice that had haunted her dreams. It was a voice that spoke of ancient power, of a world beyond human comprehension. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She wanted to run, to scream, to break the spell that held her captive. But she couldn't move, her legs rooted to the spot, her gaze locked on his. She felt a strange pull towards him, a fascination that warred with her terror. Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. A faint smile touched his lips, a chillingly beautiful expression that sent shivers down her spine. "You know who I am, Talia. You have felt my presence, heard my whispers. You have dreamt of me." I don't understand," she stammered, her mind reeling. This isn't possible." He took a step closer, the air between them growing even colder. "The impossible is merely that which you have not yet accepted," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with an undeniable authority. "Hollowmere has long whispered of the Frostborn King, the one who would rise when the first snowfall arrived in summer. They spoke of it as a legend, a fairy tale. But legends are often rooted in truth, Talia. And the truth is, I am here. The Frostborn King." The words echoed in her mind, a chilling confirmation of her deepest fears. He was a creature of myth, a being of unimaginable power. And he was standing before her, claiming her as his own. "But why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. His silver eyes softened, a flicker of something that might have been compassion crossing his face. "Because you are connected to this land, Talia. You are descended from the line of Alara, the woman who first made the pact with the Frostborn. You carry her blood, her magic, her sensitivity." He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. She could feel the cold radiating from his fingertips, a chilling contrast to the sudden heat that flushed her cheeks. "You were meant for winter, Talia. And winter has come to claim you." His words struck a chord deep within her, a resonance that she couldn't deny. She had always felt different, set apart from the other residents of Hollowmere. She had inherited Alara's sensitivity to the unseen world, her connection to the whispers of the mountains. But she had always dismissed it as imagination, as a quirk of her personality. Now, she was being told that it was something more, something real, something that tied her to this creature of ice and snow. I don't want this," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. I want to go home. His smile faded, replaced by an expression of sadness. It was gone so quickly, Talia couldn't be sure. Home is where the heart is, Talia, he said, his voice low and gentle. And your heart, whether you know it or not, belongs to the winter. He lowered his hand, his fingers brushing against the silver locket she wore. The locket, shaped like a snowflake, suddenly felt intensely cold, burning her skin. She gasped, clutching at it, her eyes widening in alarm. The mark of the Frostborn, he said, his gaze fixed on the locket. It has awakened. You cannot deny your destiny, Talia. You are mine. The mist swirled around them, thicker now, obscuring the surrounding landscape. The wind howled, a fierce, unrelenting gale that threatened to tear her from her feet. The storm was rising, mirroring the turmoil within her, the battle between fear and a strange, undeniable pull towards this enigmatic, terrifyingly beautiful king. The lake, the world, seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them, locked in a silent, frozen battle of wills. And Talia knew, with a chilling certainty, that her life had changed forever. What would he do? Chapter 5. The King's Claim. The intensity of his gaze didn't lessen, but the storm around them seemed to subtly recede, the howling wind softening to a mournful whisper. The mist, though still thick, no longer felt quite so threatening. It was as if he had calmed the elements with a mere shift in his mood, a display of power that both terrified and fascinated Talia. Mine, he repeated, the word a soft caress against the icy air. Not in the way you might fear, Talia. Not as a prisoner, but as a consort. A queen. Talia's mind struggled to grasp the concept. Queen? Of what? Of this frozen wasteland? Of a kingdom of ice and snow? The idea was ludicrous, yet the earnestness in his silver eyes, the almost pleading tone in his voice, made her hesitate. I don't understand. I'm an ordinary woman, a librarian. I'm not queen material. She laughed, a shaky, breathless sound that was devoid of humor. He tilted his head slightly, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Ordinary? You are far from ordinary, Talia Corvin. You possess a strength you have yet to fully realize, a connection to the ancient magic that flows through this land. You are the key to restoring balance, to healing the rift between the mortal world and the realm of winter. Balance? Rift? Talia shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. I don't know anything about this. He sighed, a puff of icy air that momentarily obscured his face. It is a long story, Talia, one that spans centuries. A story of betrayal, of broken promises, of a curse that has plagued my people for generations. Your ancestor, Alara, understood. She tried to help, to maintain the balance. But the pact was broken, and the consequences have been severe. He gestured towards the frozen lake, towards the unnatural chill that gripped Hollowmere. This is not my doing, Talia. This is the result of the broken pact, the consequence of the mortal world forgetting the old ways, of turning its back on the magic that sustains it. The winter is out of balance, and it is bleeding into your world. Talia looked at the frozen lake, at the unnatural mist that clung to the town. She thought of the whispers she had heard, the dreams she had had, the feeling of being watched. It all started to make a strange, terrifying kind of sense. And you believe I can fix this? She asked, her voice hesitant. I know you can, he said, his voice filled with a conviction that was both unsettling and strangely reassuring. You have the power, Talia. You just need to embrace it, to accept your destiny. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. She could feel the cold radiating from him, a tangible force that made her shiver. But beneath the cold, she also sensed something else, a warmth, a hidden fire that burned beneath the surface of his icy exterior. Come with me, he said, extending his hand towards her. Let me show you. Let me teach you. Let me help you understand. His hand, long and elegant, was pale as snow, the veins beneath his skin a delicate tracery of blue. It looked cold, fragile, yet Talia sensed an underlying strength, a power that could crush her with ease. She hesitated, her mind warring between fear and a growing curiosity, a strange pull towards this enigmatic king and the world he represented. The choice was hers. She could turn and run, try to escape back to the familiar, if somewhat shattered, reality of her life. Or she could take his hand, step into the unknown, and embrace a destiny she never imagined. The weight of that choice pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, of malice. But all she saw was a deep, ancient sadness, a longing for something lost, something he believed she could help him find. And, perhaps, a flicker of something more, a hint of desire, of a connection that transcended the boundaries of their different worlds. Her heart, seemingly frozen only moments before, began to beat a strange and urgent rhythm. He was asking her to abandon everything she knew, to risk everything for the chance of fixing something she never knew was broken. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Past. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the soft crackling of the ice beneath their feet. The mist swirled, creating an ethereal, otherworldly atmosphere. Talia's mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, doubt, curiosity, and a strange, undeniable pull towards this enigmatic king all warred within her. She thought of her life in Hollowmere, the quiet routine, the familiar faces, the memories of Thomas. It was a life she had cherished, a life that had been shattered by grief, but a life that was, nonetheless, hers. Could she really abandon it all? Could she step into this unknown world, this realm of ice and snow, and embrace a destiny she never asked for? But then she thought of the whispers, the dreams, the frozen lake, the unnatural chill that had gripped the town. She thought of Alara, her grandmother, and the stories she had told, the stories Talia had dismissed as folklore. Perhaps there was more truth to those stories than she had ever imagined. Perhaps she did have a role to play in this, a responsibility to the land, to the magic that flowed through her veins. And then there were his eyes, those silver eyes that seemed to see right through her, that held a depth of sadness and longing that resonated with her own grief, her own sense of loss. She saw in him a reflection of her own pain, a shared vulnerability that transcended their differences. She took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. "Tell me more," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Tell me about this pact. About Alara. About what you need from me." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a slow, almost imperceptible smile. He lowered his hand, but the intensity of his gaze remained. "Very well, Talia. But not here. Come with me. There is a place where we can speak, a place where the echoes of the past still linger." He turned and began to walk away, his movements fluid and graceful, his footsteps silent on the ice. He didn't look back, didn't offer his hand again. He simply expected her to follow. And, to her own surprise, she did. She followed him across the frozen lake, towards the towering peaks of the Whisperwood Mountains. The mist thickened as they walked, obscuring the path ahead, creating a sense of isolation, of being cut off from the rest of the world. It was as if they were entering another realm, a world separate from the one she knew. As they climbed, the landscape began to change. The trees, bare and skeletal, were coated in a thick layer of frost. The ground was covered in a blanket of snow, sparkling with an unnatural, almost ethereal light. The air grew colder, sharper, but Talia found that she didn't mind. The cold seemed to invigorate her, to awaken something within her, a sense of belonging. He led her to a hidden cave, nestled high in the mountains, its entrance concealed by a curtain of frozen waterfalls. The ice shimmered with a rainbow of colors, reflecting the pale light of the sky. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, a hidden sanctuary untouched by the passage of time. Inside the cave, the air was surprisingly warm. A small fire burned in a hearth carved from the rock, casting a flickering glow on the walls. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, intricate designs that depicted scenes of wolves, snowflakes, and figures that seemed to dance in the firelight. "This is where it began," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness of the cave. "This is where Alara first met my ancestor, the first Frostborn king." He gestured towards the carvings, his fingers tracing the outline of a woman, her hair long and flowing, her hand outstretched towards a towering figure shrouded in ice. They made a pact, a promise to maintain the balance between the mortal world and the realm of winter. Alara, gifted with the sight, understood the importance of this balance. She agreed to serve as a guardian, a protector of the gateway between the two worlds. He paused, his gaze turning inward, his voice filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. But the pact was broken. Over time, the mortals forgot the old ways. They grew greedy, disrespectful of the land, of the magic that sustained them. They hunted the wolves, the sacred animals of the Frostborn, to near extinction. They built their towns, their roads, their dams, disrupting the natural flow of energy. And Alara? Talia asked, her voice soft. She tried to warn them, he said, his voice filled with a hint of bitterness. She tried to maintain the balance, but it was too late. The damage was done. The winter, angered by the betrayal, began to encroach upon the mortal world. The Frostborn, weakened and scattered, were unable to stop it. He turned to face her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. The curse, Talia, is the imbalance. It is the winter's rage, its sorrow, its longing for what was lost. And you, as Alara's descendant, are the only one who can heal it. He stopped short and looked not at her, but beyond her. What was it? Chapter 7. The Mark of the Frost. Talia followed his gaze, but saw nothing beyond the flickering firelight and the ancient carvings on the cave walls. The silence deepened, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant drip of melting ice. The air, which had been surprisingly warm, suddenly grew colder, a chill that seeped into her bones. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "What do you see?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes still fixed on something beyond her perception. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of concern and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. "It is nothing," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "A shadow. A memory." He turned back to her, his silver eyes regaining their intensity. "You were asking about the curse, about what you can do to heal it." Talia nodded, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over her. She wanted to believe him, to trust that the shadow he had seen was nothing more than a figment of his imagination. But a part of her, the part that had inherited Alara's sensitivity, sensed that there was more to it than he was letting on. "You said I have the power," she said, her voice regaining a little strength. "But I don't feel powerful. I don't know what to do." He smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible smile that softened his features. "The power is within you, Talia. It is dormant, waiting to be awakened. The mark of the Frostborn, the locket you wear, is the key." Talia instinctively touched the silver snowflake locket, which had remained cold against her skin. She had always worn it, a cherished memento of her grandmother, but she had never understood its true significance. "Alara imbued it with her magic," he explained, his gaze fixed on the locket. "It is a conduit, a connection to the realm of winter. It will guide you, protect you, and help you to channel the power you need." He reached out, his fingers brushing against the locket. A jolt of energy surged through her, a wave of cold that spread through her entire body. She gasped, her eyes widening in surprise. "The locket is reacting to you," he said, his voice filled with a hint of wonder. "It recognizes you as its rightful owner, as the heir to Alara's legacy." As he spoke, the locket began to glow, a faint, ethereal light that emanated from within. The light grew brighter, illuminating the cave with an otherworldly glow. Talia felt a strange sensation, a tingling in her fingertips, a warmth spreading through her chest. It was as if something within her was awakening, a power she had never known she possessed. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice breathless. "The magic is flowing through you," he said, his eyes shining with excitement. "You are beginning to embrace your destiny." The light from the locket intensified, and Talia felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. She felt stronger, more alive, more connected to the world around her. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the whisper of the wind through the mountains, the cold, ancient energy of the Frostborn. But then, a sudden pain shot through her hand, a sharp, burning sensation that made her cry out. She looked down and saw a mark appearing on her skin, just below her wrist. It was a small, intricate design, shaped like a snowflake, the same design as the locket. "The mark of the frost," he said, his voice grave. "It is a sign of your bond with the winter, a symbol of your commitment to the pact." The mark glowed with a faint, blue light, mirroring the glow of the locket. It was beautiful, but also terrifying. It was a permanent reminder of the choice she had made, of the path she had chosen. "It hurts," she said, her voice trembling. "The pain will fade," he reassured her, his voice softening. "It is a necessary part of the transformation. You are becoming something more, Talia. You are becoming one of us." The pain subsided, leaving a lingering tingling sensation. She looked at the mark on her wrist, at the glowing locket, at the silver eyes of the Frostborn King. She was no longer just Talia Corvin, the retired librarian from Hollowmere. She was something more, something other. She felt it down to her very core. But she had to ask, what was one of us? Chapter 8. A bargain struck. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Talia's gaze shifted between the mark on her wrist, still glowing faintly, and the Frostborn King's enigmatic face. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mimic the turmoil within her. "One of us," he repeated, his voice a low murmur that resonated with the ancient power of the cave. "A guardian of the balance. A bridge between the mortal world and the realm of winter. A being who can wield the magic of the Frostborn." He paused, his silver eyes searching hers, as if gauging her reaction. "It is not a transformation of the flesh, Talia, but of the spirit. You will retain your humanity, your memories, your emotions. But you will also gain abilities. A connection to the winter that will allow you to influence the elements, to heal the land, to restore the balance." Talia's mind struggled to grasp the concept. She was still Talia, yet different. Enhanced. Empowered. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. She thought of the frozen lake, the unnatural chill, the suffering of Hollowmere. If she could truly help, if she could restore the balance, wouldn't she be obligated to try? "And what would I have to do?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He stepped closer, his presence filling the cave. She could feel the cold radiating from him, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt familiar, almost comforting. "You would need to learn," he said, his voice gentle. "To understand the ways of the Frostborn, to master the magic that flows through you. You would need to spend time in both worlds, the mortal and the ethereal, working to heal the rift, to guide your people towards a more sustainable way of life." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "And you would need to stay with me. For a time, at least. Until the balance is restored." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Stay with him. The idea was both alluring and frightening. She was drawn to him, to his power, to his vulnerability, to the strange connection that had formed between them. But she also feared losing herself, losing her independence, losing the life she had known. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He shrugged, a gesture that seemed surprisingly human. "Time flows differently in the realm of winter. It could be months, it could be years in your terms. But I promise you, Talia, I will not keep you against your will. When the balance is restored, when the curse is lifted, you will be free to return to your world, if that is your wish." A bargain. A pact of her own. It was a daunting prospect, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt, the sense of responsibility that weighed upon her. She looked at the mark on her wrist, at the glowing locket, at the ancient carvings on the cave walls. She thought of Alara, of her legacy, of the chance to make a difference. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling. His expression darkened, a shadow crossing his face. "The winter will continue to encroach upon your world," he said, his voice cold and hard. "Hollowmere will become a frozen wasteland. The balance will be lost forever. And you, Talia, will bear the weight of that failure, the knowledge that you could have prevented it." The threat was clear, the stakes impossibly high. She had no choice, not really. She was bound to this, to him, by blood, by magic, by destiny. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. "I accept," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I will do what I can to help restore the balance." His face softened, a genuine smile, warm, not at all chilling, gracing his features. "Thank you, Talia. You have made the right choice." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers cold but gentle. The mark on her wrist pulsed with warmth, a confirmation of the bond that had formed between them. A new wave of power surged up within her. "Then let us begin." He turned his gaze away from her and focused on the cave entrance. "It seems we are no longer alone." What was it this time? Chapter 9. The warmth of his touch. Talia followed his gaze, her senses on high alert. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced across the cave walls, making it difficult to discern any real movement. The only sound was the gentle drip of melting ice from the frozen waterfall that concealed the entrance. But she trusted his instincts. He had sensed something that had shifted his demeanor from gentle acceptance to wary vigilance. "Who is it?" she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to the locket at her throat. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowed, his body tense. He held up a hand, silencing her. He listened intently, his head tilted slightly, as if trying to catch a faint sound carried on the wind. "I do not know," he said finally, his voice a low murmur. "But they are not Frostborn. Their scent is different. Earthy. And fear." Fear. The word sent a shiver down Talia's spine. If this unknown presence was afraid, what did that mean for them? Were they in danger? He released her hand, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The warmth of his touch, a surprising contrast to his icy exterior, had spread through her arm, a comforting sensation that she hadn't expected. It was a subtle reminder that there was more to him than just cold and power, that there was a hidden vulnerability, a capacity for warmth that she found strangely alluring. He moved towards the entrance of the cave, his movements fluid and silent, like a predator stalking its prey. He drew a long, slender blade from beneath his cloak, its surface shimmering with an ethereal, blue light. The blade seemed to be made of pure ice, yet it radiated a sense of power, of deadly intent. Talia watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen him like this, so dangerous. It was a reminder of his true nature, of the power he wielded, of the world she had stepped into. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and commanding. "And be silent." He disappeared behind the curtain of frozen waterfalls, leaving Talia alone in the flickering firelight. She huddled closer to the fire, her hands wrapped around her arms, trying to ward off the sudden chill that had gripped her. She strained her ears, listening for any sound that might indicate what was happening outside. The silence stretched on, agonizingly long. Talia's imagination ran wild, conjuring images of terrifying creatures, of deadly battles, of the Frostborn king being overwhelmed by some unknown enemy. She fought back the urge to run, to follow him, to offer whatever help she could. But she knew she would be more of a hindrance than a help. She was still learning, still adapting to this new reality. Then she heard it, a muffled shout, followed by the clash of metal on metal. The sounds were faint, distorted by the frozen waterfall, but they were unmistakable. A fight was taking place, just outside the cave. Talia's fear intensified, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She clutched the locket, her fingers tracing the outline of the snowflake. The locket pulsed with warmth, a reassuring presence in the midst of her terror. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sounds of battle. Talia held her breath, her ears straining, her eyes fixed on the entrance of the cave. After what seemed like an eternity, He reappeared, his cloak dusted with snow, his blade gleaming in the firelight. There was a small cut on his cheek, a thin line of crimson against his pale skin. But his expression was calm, almost serene. "It is over," he said, his voice returning to its normal, low murmur. They were hunters. Mortal men, seeking to profit from the legends. Hunters. Mortal men. The words brought a wave of relief, followed by a surge of anger. These men, driven by greed and ignorance, had dared to intrude upon this sacred place, to threaten the Frostborn king, to endanger her. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. She moved towards him, instinctively reaching out to touch his injured cheek. He flinched slightly at her touch, his silver eyes widening in surprise. It was a subtle reaction, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. He was not used to such gestures, to such displays of concern. He kept the surprise from his face, though it flickered in his eyes. He straightened and looked, bewildered, at Talia. What now? Chapter 10. The Hunter's Shadow. Talia, momentarily frozen by his reaction, quickly withdrew her hand. A blush crept up her neck, warming her cheeks. She hadn't thought, had simply acted on instinct, driven by a surge of concern for this enigmatic being who, despite his power and his otherworldly nature, seemed strangely vulnerable. I'm sorry," she stammered, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't mean to." He tilted his head slightly, a flicker of amusement, and something else she couldn't quite decipher, in his silver eyes. "There is no need to apologize, Talia," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "It is unusual. That is all." He reached up and touched the cut on his cheek, his fingers tracing the thin line of crimson. The blood, she noticed, was already freezing, forming a delicate tracery of ice crystals on his skin. "It is nothing," he said, dismissing the injury with a wave of his hand. "The Frostborn heal quickly." Talia nodded, still feeling awkward. She wasn't used to interacting with beings who possessed such power, who were so different. She was still learning the rules, the boundaries of this new world. "Who were they?" she asked, changing the subject, trying to regain her composure. "Why were they hunting you?" His expression darkened, a shadow crossing his face. "They were from a group known as the Order of the Silver Dawn," he said, his voice filled with a hint of disdain. "A secretive organization, dedicated to hunting and eradicating anything they deem unnatural. They have been a thorn in our side for centuries." The Order of the Silver Dawn. The name sent a chill down Talia's spine. It sounded ominous, dangerous. She had never heard of them before, but the way he spoke of them, the cold fury in his eyes, made it clear that they were a serious threat. "They believe the legends," he continued, his gaze turning inward, his voice filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. "They believe that the Frostborn are monsters, demons to be destroyed. They do not understand the balance, the delicate web that connects all things. They only see what they fear." He looked at her, his silver eyes piercing. "They are a danger, Talia. Not just to me, but to you as well. Now that you bear the mark of the frost, they will see you as one of us. They will hunt you." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had known that stepping into this world would be dangerous, but she hadn't fully grasped the extent of the threat. She was no longer just an observer, a bystander. She was a target. What can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. He placed a hand on her arm, his touch surprisingly warm, reassuring. "We will be careful," he said, his voice firm. "We will protect ourselves. And we will continue our work to restore the balance. The Order of the Silver Dawn is a powerful enemy, but they are not invincible." His confidence, his strength, gave her a measure of comfort. She trusted him, she realized. She trusted him to protect her, to guide her, to help her navigate this dangerous new world. "We should leave this place," he said, his gaze turning towards the entrance of the cave. "It is no longer safe. The hunters may have alerted others. We need to find somewhere more secure." He extinguished the fire with a wave of his hand, plunging the cave into darkness. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. His touch was cold, but not unpleasant. It sent a shiver through her, a mixture of fear and excitement. They emerged from the cave, stepping back into the swirling mist. The landscape was shrouded in an ethereal, otherworldly glow. The air was cold, crisp, and clean. Talia felt a sense of exhilaration, of freedom, despite the danger that lurked in the shadows. He led her through the mountains, his movements swift and sure. He seemed to know every path, every hidden trail. He was a creature of this world, at home in the wilderness, and Talia felt a growing sense of awe, of respect for his power and his knowledge. The hunters were a danger. However, the real question remained. Where was he taking her? Chapter 11. Secrets in the Snow. He led her not towards the lower slopes, towards Hollowmere, but higher into the Whisperwood Mountains. The snow deepened, the trees grew sparser, and the wind howled with a fierce intensity. Talia, despite her thick clothing and the surprising warmth that radiated from the Frostborn King's hand, began to shiver. "Where are we going?" she asked, her breath clouding in the frigid air. Her voice was strained, the altitude and the cold making it difficult to speak. "To a place of safety," he replied, his voice a low murmur that was almost lost in the wind. "A place where the order cannot reach us. A place where you can begin your training." Training. The word sent a thrill of anticipation through her, mixed with a healthy dose of apprehension. She had accepted her destiny, her role in restoring the balance, but she still felt woefully unprepared. She had no idea how to wield the magic that flowed through her, how to control the elements, how to fight the enemies that would surely come. The landscape became increasingly desolate, a vast expanse of white, broken only by the occasional jagged rock face or twisted, wind-battered tree. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the snow and the howl of the wind. It felt as if they were the only two beings left in the world. After what seemed like hours, they reached their destination. It was a hidden valley, nestled high in the mountains, surrounded by towering peaks that seemed to pierce the sky. The valley was sheltered from the wind, and the snow here was pristine, untouched by any footprint. In the center of the valley stood a structure, built from ice and snow, that shimmered with an ethereal, blue light. It was a palace, a fortress, a work of art, all rolled into one. Talia gasped, her breath catching in her throat. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The ice was perfectly smooth, reflecting the surrounding landscape like a mirror. Intricate carvings adorned the walls, depicting scenes of wolves, snowflakes, and figures that seemed to dance in the light. "Welcome to Winterhaven," he said, his voice filled with a hint of pride. "My home. And for now, yours." He led her towards a palace, the ice shimmering beneath their feet. As they approached, a large archway, carved from a single block of ice, opened before them, revealing a courtyard filled with snow-covered gardens and frozen fountains. Inside the palace, the air was surprisingly warm. The walls were lined with tapestries woven from frost and moonlight, depicting scenes from the history of the Frostborn. The floors were covered in thick furs, soft and warm beneath her feet. The light came from intricate ice chandeliers that hung from the ceiling, casting a soft, blue glow throughout the rooms. He led her through a series of chambers, each more breathtaking than the last. There were libraries filled with ancient tomes bound in ice, observatories with telescopes that pointed towards the stars, and workshops filled with strange and wondrous tools. Finally, he stopped before a large, ornate door, carved from a single piece of obsidian. "This will be your chamber," he said, his voice softening. "A place where you can rest, reflect, and begin to explore your powers." He opened the door, revealing a room that was both elegant and comfortable. A large bed, draped in furs, dominated the center of the room. A fireplace, carved from white marble, crackled with a warm, inviting fire. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with books and scrolls. A large window offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding mountains. "It's beautiful," Talia said, her voice filled with awe. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "I am glad you like it. I want you to feel at home here." He paused, his gaze turning serious. There is much to learn, Talia. Much to prepare for. The Order of the Silver Dawn is not our only enemy. There are other forces at play, ancient powers that stir in the darkness. We must be ready. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. He handed it to her. This is a journal, he said. It belonged to Alara. It contains her knowledge, her insights, her experiences with the Frostborn. It may help you to understand your own powers, your own connection to this world. Talia took the journal, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. It felt warm to the touch, as if it held a spark of Alara's spirit. She opened it, her eyes scanning the faded, handwritten script. The first page she saw was a diagram of the snowflake design on her wrist. The words Frostborns Vow were written beneath the image. As she focused on the scrawled words, a new voice entered her thoughts. Who is this? Chapter 12. The Solstice Dance. The voice was not the Frostborn King's, nor was it her own internal monologue. It was feminine, laced with an ancient power that resonated deep within Talia's bones, echoing the very magic that now pulsed through her veins. It was Alara. Talia gasped, dropping the journal as if it had burned her. The book landed on the soft furs with a muffled thump, the pages falling open to reveal a detailed drawing of a wolf howling at a full moon. The Frostborn King, whose name she still did not know, swiftly picked it up, his silver eyes filled with concern. Are you all right, Talia? I heard a voice, she stammered, her hand flying to her chest, where her heart hammered against her ribs. In my head. It was Alara. His expression shifted, a mixture of understanding and was that awe? The journal is more than just a record of her experiences, Talia. It is a conduit to her spirit, a way for her to communicate with you, to guide you. He held the journal out to her again, but Talia hesitated, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. She had embraced her destiny, accepted her role in restoring the balance, but the reality of communicating with the spirit of her long-dead grandmother was unsettling. It's all right to be afraid, he said softly, his voice reassuring. But Alara is not a threat. She wants to help you. She chose you. His words, and the gentle warmth in his eyes, gave her courage. She reached out and took the journal, her fingers trembling slightly. As she held it, she felt a faint tingling sensation, a warmth that spread through her arm, a connection to something ancient and powerful. Try again, he encouraged. Focus on the journal, on Alara's image. Open your mind to her. Talia took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and focused her thoughts. She pictured Alara, her grandmother, as she remembered her, her kind eyes, her gentle smile, her hands always busy with knitting needles or tending to her garden. She thought of the stories Alara had told her, the whispers of the mountains, the old magic. Grandmother? She thought, her voice a silent plea in her mind. Talia, the voice responded, stronger this time, clearer. My child, you have come. Tears welled up in Talia's eyes, tears of relief, of joy, of a connection that transcended death itself. She wasn't alone. She had Alara, her grandmother, to guide her, to teach her, to help her navigate this strange and wondrous new world. I hear her, she whispered, opening her eyes, a smile spreading across her face. I hear Alara. The Frostborn King smiled in return, a genuine expression of happiness that softened his features, making him appear less intimidating, more human. I am glad, he said. She will be a valuable ally, a source of wisdom and strength. He paused, his gaze turning thoughtful. Tonight is the winter solstice, he said, changing the subject. A time of great power, a time when the veil between the worlds is at its thinnest. We will celebrate with a dance, a ritual to honor the winter and to strengthen our connection to the Frostborn. A dance. The word sent a flutter of excitement through her. She had always loved to dance, had felt a sense of freedom, of joy in the movement, in the music. But a ritual dance? With the Frostborn? It was a daunting prospect. I don't know any Frostborn dances, she said, her voice hesitant. He chuckled, a low, melodic sound that sent a shiver down her spine. The dance is not about steps, Talia. It is about feeling, about connecting to the energy of the winter, about letting the magic flow through you. I will guide you. He offered his hand, and Talia, her heart beating a little faster, took it. His touch, as always, was cold, but not unpleasant. It sent a jolt of energy through her, a spark of excitement that chased away her apprehension. He led her from the chamber, back through the palace, towards a large, open-air courtyard. The courtyard was filled with Frostborn, beings of ethereal beauty, their skin pale as snow, their hair shimmering like moonlight. They were dressed in flowing robes of ice and frost, adorned with intricate silver jewelry. The air hummed with magic, with anticipation. As they entered the courtyard, the Frostborn turned to face them, their silver eyes shining with curiosity and respect. Talia felt a wave of self-consciousness, but the Frostborn King's presence beside her, his hand holding hers, gave her courage. He was so very close. Music began to play, a haunting melody that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. It was a music of ice and snow, of wind and stars, of ancient power and hidden beauty. The Frostborn began to move, their bodies swaying to the rhythm, their movements fluid and graceful, like snowflakes dancing on the wind. He finally spoke a single word. His name. What was it? Chapter 13. A Heart Divided. Kaelin, he said, his voice a low murmur close to her ear, the sound sending a surprising shiver down her spine. It wasn't just the proximity, but the name itself. It suited him. Sharp, elegant, with a hint of something untamed beneath the surface. Kaelin, the Frostborn King. The music swelled, the melody weaving a tapestry of ice and snow, of ancient power and hidden longing. Kaelin led her into the center of the courtyard, his movements fluid and graceful, his silver eyes locked on hers. He didn't speak, didn't instruct. He simply moved, and Talia, her hand held firmly in his, found herself following, her body responding instinctively to the rhythm, to the magic that pulsed through the air. It wasn't a dance she knew, not in any traditional sense. There were no prescribed steps, no formal patterns. It was a dance of feeling, of connection, of letting the energy of the winter flow through her, guide her movements. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, letting go of her inhibitions, of her fears, of her self-consciousness. She felt Kaelin's presence beside her, a steady, reassuring anchor in the swirling vortex of magic. She felt the cold radiating from him, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt invigorating, empowering. She felt the mark on her wrist, the symbol of her bond with the winter, pulsing with warmth, a tangible connection to the power that flowed through her. As she danced, she began to feel a shift within her, a transformation. She felt stronger, more alive, more connected to the world around her. She felt the ancient magic of the Frostborn awakening within her, responding to the music, to the rhythm, to Kaelin's presence. She opened her eyes, and the world seemed to shimmer with a new intensity. She saw the Frostborn, not as strange and intimidating creatures, but as beings of ethereal beauty, their movements graceful and fluid, their faces illuminated by the soft, blue light of the ice palace. She saw Kaelin, not as a creature of myth, a terrifying king, but as a man, a being of complex emotions, of hidden vulnerability, of a deep, ancient sadness that resonated with her own grief, her own sense of loss. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the longing for connection, the burden of responsibility he carried. And she felt something more, something that went beyond respect, beyond gratitude, beyond the strange pull of their shared destiny. She felt a stirring of desire, a spark of attraction that ignited a warmth within her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the magic of the Frostborn and everything to do with the man himself. The realization shocked her, sending a wave of confusion and guilt washing over her. She was still grieving Thomas, still clinging to the memories of their life together. How could she feel this way about Kaelin, a being so different, so other? But the feeling persisted, undeniable, a warmth that spread through her chest, a fluttering in her stomach, a heightened awareness of his presence, of his touch, of the scent of winter that clung to him. The music reached a crescendo, the rhythm building to a frenzied climax. Kalen drew her closer, his hand tightening on hers, his silver eyes burning into hers. She felt a surge of energy pass between them, a spark of connection that transcended the boundaries of their different worlds. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. The Frostborns stood still, their faces turned towards them, their eyes filled with anticipation. Kalen released her hand, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. He stepped back, his expression unreadable. "The dance is over," he said, his voice a low murmur that echoed through the silent courtyard. "The solstice energy has been harnessed." The balance strengthened. Talia nodded, her mind still reeling from the intensity of the dance, from the confusing emotions that had surged through her. She felt changed, transformed, not just by the magic, but by the connection she had felt with Kalen, a connection that both thrilled and terrified her. She was so very torn. She looked to him to do something. What was it? Chapter 14. The Price of Freedom. Kalen, sensing her inner turmoil, offered a small, almost hesitant smile. It was a subtle gesture, but it spoke volumes. He understood her confusion, her conflicting emotions, the weight of the choice she had made, and the path that lay before her. He didn't press her, didn't demand answers or declarations. He simply waited. He gestured towards a pathway leading away from the courtyard, towards a smaller, more secluded garden bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of the ice palace. "Walk with me, Talia." It wasn't a command, but an invitation. And Talia, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the solstice dance, found herself accepting. She needed to talk, to process the whirlwind of emotions that had swept through her, to understand the strange, undeniable connection she felt with this enigmatic king. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sound the gentle crunch of their boots on the pristine snow. The garden was a haven of tranquility, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy of the courtyard. Frozen fountains, sculpted into intricate shapes of wolves and snowflakes, sparkled in the moonlight. The air was still and surprisingly warm, a testament to the magic that permeated Winter Haven. "The dance," Talia began, her voice hesitant, unsure where to start. "It was powerful." Kalen nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "The solstice dance is a sacred ritual," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "It is a way for us to connect with the heart of winter, to draw upon its power, to strengthen the bonds that hold our world together." "And us?" Talia asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stopped, turning to face her, his silver eyes searching hers. The moonlight illuminated his features, highlighting the sharp lines of his face, the subtle curve of his lips, the depth of emotion that swirled in his eyes. "The dance is also a way for us to connect with each other," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "To understand the bond that exists between us, the shared responsibility we carry." Talia's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't deny the truth of his words. She had felt a connection with him during the dance, a connection that went beyond duty, beyond destiny. It was a connection that both thrilled and terrified her. I still miss Thomas," she confessed, her voice choked with emotion. "I still grieve for him." Kalen nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "Grief is a powerful emotion, Talia," he said. "It does not simply disappear. It lingers, like a shadow, a reminder of what was lost." He paused, his gaze softening. "But grief does not have to define you. It does not have to prevent you from finding happiness, from embracing new possibilities." His words struck a chord deep within her. She had been clinging to her grief, using it as a shield, a way to protect herself from the pain of moving on, of embracing the unknown. But Kalen was right. Grief didn't have to define her. She could honor the memory of Thomas, cherish the love they had shared, without letting it consume her. I don't know what I feel," she admitted, her voice trembling.
I'm confused.
I'm drawn to you, to this world, but I'm also afraid. Afraid of losing myself, of forgetting Thomas, of failing. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers cold but comforting. The gesture sent a shiver through her, a mixture of surprise and something more. You will not lose yourself, Talia, he said, his voice firm. You are strong, resilient, and you have Alara's guidance. You will not forget Thomas. His memory will always be a part of you, and you will not fail. I will not let you. His words, and the unwavering conviction in his eyes, gave her a measure of comfort, a sense of hope. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, letting his presence soothe her troubled soul. The path ahead will be difficult, he continued, his voice low and serious. There will be challenges, dangers, sacrifices. But you are not alone, Talia. I am here. We are in this together. He paused, his gaze dropping to her lips. For a moment, Talia thought he might kiss her. The air crackled with anticipation, with a tension that was both electric and terrifying. But then he straightened, stepping back, breaking the spell. The Order of the Silver Dawn grows bolder, he said, his voice regaining its formal tone. We must prepare. Your training begins tomorrow. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the palace. Who? Chapter 15. Betrayal's Bitter Sting. The figure that emerged from the shadows was slender, draped in furs that blended seamlessly with the snowy landscape. As they drew closer, Talia recognized the intricate silver embroidery on the cloak, the distinctive style of Frostborn attire. But it wasn't one of the Frostborn she had seen in the courtyard during the solstice dance. This was someone new. The figure approached, their face obscured by the deep hood of their cloak. When they finally lowered the hood, Talia gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in the stillness of the garden. It was a woman with striking features, sharp cheekbones, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. Her hair, the color of spun silver, was braided intricately and adorned with delicate ice crystals. She was undeniably beautiful, but there was a coldness in her gaze, a hardness in her expression, that sent a shiver down Talia's spine. Kalen's demeanor shifted instantly. He straightened, his body tensing, his silver eyes narrowing. The warmth, the vulnerability that Talia had glimpsed in him just moments before, vanished, replaced by a regal formality, a guarded distance. Lyra, he said, his voice a low murmur, devoid of any emotion. It was a statement, not a greeting. The woman, Lyra, inclined her head slightly, a gesture of respect, but her eyes remained fixed on Talia, assessing, judging. There was a subtle hostility in her gaze, a possessiveness that made Talia feel deeply uncomfortable. My king, Lyra said, her voice clear and crisp, with a melodic accent that Talia couldn't place. I have returned from my scouting mission. The Order is indeed growing bolder. They have established a new base in the foothills, closer than we anticipated. And? Kalen prompted, his voice tight. Lyra's gaze flickered back to Kalen, a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it jealousy? Resentment? Talia couldn't be sure. And, Lyra continued, her voice regaining its composure, I have discovered something disturbing. Something that concerns our guest. She emphasized the word guest, her tone dripping with disdain. Talia felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. What had Lyra discovered? What did it have to do with her? Kalen's expression remained unreadable, but Talia could sense his growing tension. He knew something, or at least suspected something, that he wasn't sharing with her. Speak plainly, Lyra, Kalen commanded, his voice sharp. Lyra stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. I have learned that the Order is not merely hunting the Frostborn, she said, her voice low and intense. They are seeking a specific artifact. An artifact of great power. An artifact that is said to be in the possession of Talia Corvin. Talia's heart leaped into her throat. An artifact? What artifact? She had no knowledge of any such thing. That's impossible, Talia protested, her voice trembling. I don't have any artifact. Lyra's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Do not play innocent, mortal," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "The Order believes you possess the heart of winter, a gem of immense power, capable of controlling the very elements." The heart of winter. The name echoed in Talia's mind, a faint whisper of a memory, a forgotten legend. She had heard Alara speak of it, in hushed tones as a child. But she had always dismissed it as a fairy tale, a myth. I don't know anything about this," Talia stammered, her mind reeling. Kalen turned to her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "Talia," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Is there anything you have not told me? Anything you remember, however small, about this heart of winter?" Talia searched her memory, desperately trying to recall anything, any detail, that might shed light on this new revelation. She thought of Alara, of her stories, of her hidden boxes, of her cryptic warnings. And then it came to her, a small, wooden box, hidden in the attic of her grandmother's house, a box she had never opened, a box Alara had told her to never open, a box that was now, presumably, in her attic. There might be something, she admitted, her voice hesitant. "A box. In my grandmother's house. I never opened it." She looked between the king and Lyra. The woman's face made her deeply uneasy. She turned to address the Frostborn king directly. "I never knew." Chapter 16. The Frozen Fortress. Kalen's expression remained unreadable, but Talia could sense the shift in his demeanor. The suspicion she had glimpsed in his eyes intensified, a coldness that sent a shiver down her spine. He was questioning her, doubting her, despite the bond they had forged, despite the trust they had seemingly built. "We must retrieve this box," he said, his voice firm, devoid of any warmth. "Immediately." His words were a command, not a suggestion. He was no longer the gentle, understanding companion she had walked with in the garden. He was the Frostborn king, a ruler accustomed to obedience, to unwavering loyalty. Talia felt a pang of hurt, a sense of betrayal. She had been honest with him, had shared her vulnerabilities, had trusted him with her fears. And now, he was treating her like a suspect, a potential enemy. "I will go," Lyra volunteered, her voice eager, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "I know the terrain. I can retrieve the box quickly and discreetly." Kalen hesitated, his gaze flickering between Talia and Lyra. Talia could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between his duty to protect his realm and his feelings for her. She couldn't be sure. "No," Talia said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a surge of anger and resentment. "I will go. It's my grandmother's house, my responsibility. I will not let you treat me like a criminal." Her words surprised her, surprised them both. She had never spoken to him like that before, had never challenged his authority. But she was tired of being treated like a pawn, like a means to an end. She was Talia Corvin, a woman of strength and resilience, and she would not be intimidated, not even by the Frostborn king. Kalen stared at her, his silver eyes searching hers, as if trying to understand this new, defiant Talia. He saw the hurt in her eyes, the anger, the determination. And, perhaps, he saw something else, a spark of the power that lay dormant within her, the power of the Frostborn that was beginning to awaken. He nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well," he said, his voice regaining some of its warmth. "We will go together. But we must be careful. The Order will be watching." He turned to Lyra, his expression hardening. "Prepare a scouting party," he commanded. "We leave at first light." Lyra's face fell, a flicker of disappointment, of resentment, crossing her features. But she bowed her head in obedience. "As you wish, my king." She turned and disappeared back into the shadows of the palace, leaving Talia and Kalen alone once more. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Talia felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was glad that Kalen had agreed to let her go, to trust her, but she was also afraid. Afraid of what they might find in the box, afraid of the Order of the Silver Dawn, afraid of the growing power within her. Kalen stepped closer, his presence filling her senses. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers cold but comforting. The gesture, so familiar now, sent a shiver through her, a reminder of the connection they shared, a connection that was being tested, strained, by the secrets and lies that surrounded them. "I am sorry, Talia," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "I did not mean to doubt you. But this heart of winter, it is a powerful artifact, a dangerous weapon. We must be cautious." Talia nodded, her anger subsiding, replaced by a weary understanding. She knew he was right. He was protecting his people, his realm. He couldn't afford to take chances. "I understand," she said, her voice quiet. "But I'm not your enemy, Kalen. I want to help. I want to restore the balance." He smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible smile that softened his features. "I know," he said. "And I believe you." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. His touch, as always, sent a jolt of energy through her, a spark of warmth that chased away the lingering chill. They stood there for a moment, their hands clasped, their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. The journey ahead would be perilous, filled with danger and uncertainty. But they would face it together, bound by a shared destiny, by growing trust, and by a connection that was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. They had to return to Hollowmere, a place she'd thought never to revisit. A place that was not safe. Chapter 17. Scars of the Soul. The journey back to Hollowmere was a stark contrast to the ethereal beauty of Winterhaven. The biting wind whipped at their faces, the snow stung their eyes, and the ever-present threat of the Order of the Silver Dawn hung heavy in the air. They traveled mostly in silence, Kalen leading the way, his senses on high alert, scanning the landscape for any sign of danger. Talia, bundled in furs provided by Kalen, found her thoughts drifting back to her life before the unseasonal chill, before the frozen lake, before the Frostborn King had claimed her. She remembered the quiet routine of her days, the familiar comfort of her home, the lingering grief for Thomas. It felt like a lifetime ago, a world apart from the magical realm she now inhabited. As they descended from the mountains, the familiar landmarks of Hollowmere began to appear, shrouded in an unnatural mist that clung to the town like a shroud. The sight of her home, the old Victorian house she had inherited from Alara, sent a pang of longing through her, mixed with a sense of dread. The town was eerily deserted, the streets empty, the houses dark and silent. The unnatural chill that had gripped Hollowmere had intensified, the air thick with a palpable sense of fear and despair. It was as if the life had been drained from the town, leaving behind a hollow shell. They approached Talia's house cautiously, Kalen his hand resting on the hilt of his ice blade. The garden, once overgrown and vibrant with life, was now withered and brown, covered in a layer of frost. The wind chimes, silent and still, hung like frozen tears from the porch. Kalen surveyed the surroundings, his silver eyes scanning every shadow, every window, every possible hiding place. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low and cautious. They entered the house, the familiar scent of lavender and old books greeting Talia like a ghost from the past. The house was cold, the silence amplifying the creaks and groans of the aging structure. It felt violated, somehow, tainted by the knowledge of the danger that lurked outside. "The attic," Talia said, her voice a whisper, leading the way up the narrow, creaking staircase. The attic was a dusty, dimly lit space, filled with cobwebs and forgotten relics of the past. Boxes overflowed with old photographs, letters, and trinkets, each holding a memory, a whisper of Alara's life. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and a palpable sense of waiting. Talia located the box almost immediately. It was a small, wooden chest, tucked away in a corner, beneath a pile of old blankets. The wood was dark and aged, the hinges rusty, the lock simple but secure. She knelt down, her hands trembling as she reached for the box. She hesitated, a sudden wave of fear washing over her. What if the order was right? What if this box contained something dangerous, something she couldn't control? Kaelin placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. I am here, Talia, he said softly. Whatever is in there, we will face it together. His words gave her courage. She took a deep breath and lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object. It was a gem, a crystal that pulsed with a soft, blue light. It was roughly the size of her palm, shaped like a teardrop, and its surface was covered in intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. The heart of winter. As she gazed at the gem, she felt a surge of power, a connection to the ancient magic of the Frostborn. She could feel the cold emanating from it, a chilling energy that resonated with the mark on her wrist. But she also felt something else, a deep, profound sadness, a sense of loss and longing that echoed the emotions she had sensed in Kaelin, in the very essence of winter itself. Kaelin stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the gem. It is beautiful, he said, his voice filled with awe. And dangerous. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the surface of the gem. It holds the power of the winter, he said. The power to create, and the power to destroy. In the wrong hands, he didn't finish the sentence, but Talia understood. The Order of the Silver Dawn wanted this gem, wanted to use its power for their own twisted purposes. And they would stop at nothing to get it. Suddenly, a crash from downstairs shattered the silence. Kaelin whirled around, his ice blade drawn, his body tensing for battle. They're here, he said, his voice grim. The Order. But there was something else in his eyes. Betrayal. Who? Chapter 18. The Thawing Heart. Kaelin's gaze wasn't focused on the stairs, on the anticipated entrance of the Order. It was fixed on the attic window, a small, grimy pane that offered a limited view of the deserted street below. Talia followed his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw a flicker of movement, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the neighboring house. It was a figure, cloaked and hooded, but even in the dim light, Talia recognized the distinctive silver embroidery on the cloak, the graceful, almost feline movements. Lyra. Betrayal. The word echoed in Talia's mind, a cold wave of disbelief washing over her. Lyra, the Frostborn scout, Kaelin's trusted lieutenant, had led the Order to them. Kaelin's face was a mask of controlled fury, his silver eyes blazing with an icy fire. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The betrayal was evident, the pain and anger radiating from him in palpable waves.
Why?
Talia whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She couldn't understand. Why would Lyra betray her own kind? Why would she betray Kaelin? Kaelin didn't answer, his attention focused on the unfolding events below. Figures, clad in the dark uniforms of the Order, were emerging from the shadows, surrounding the house. They were heavily armed, their faces grim and determined. We need to get out of here, Kaelin said, his voice low and urgent.
Now.
He grabbed the heart of winter, wrapping it in a piece of cloth and tucking it inside his cloak. He took Talia's hand, his grip firm and reassuring.
Stay close to me, he said. And trust me.
They moved quickly and silently, descending the stairs, avoiding the main entrance. Kaelin led her through the back of the house, towards a small, overgrown garden that offered a potential escape route. As they reached the back door, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. It was Lyra, her blue eyes gleaming with a cold, triumphant light. Going somewhere, my king? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Kaelin stopped, his body tensing, his hand tightening on Talia's. He didn't speak, his silver eyes fixed on Lyra, a silent battle of wills taking place between them. Why, Lyra? Talia asked again, her voice trembling. Why would you do this? Lyra's gaze shifted to Talia, her expression filled with a mixture of disdain and envy. You do not belong here, mortal, she said, her voice cold and hard. You are an outsider, a threat to our way of life. You have bewitched our king, stolen his affections, and weakened our realm. Her words struck Talia like a physical blow. So that was it. jealousy, possessiveness. Lyra was in love with Kaelin, and she saw Talia as a rival, a threat to her own desires. That's not true, Talia protested, her voice rising. I never asked for any of this. I just want to restore the balance, to help silence. Lyra hissed, her hand moving to the hilt of a silver dagger she wore at her belt. You will say nothing. You will do nothing. You will be handed over to the Order, and the Heart of Winter will be returned to its rightful place. Kaelin stepped forward, placing himself between Talia and Lyra. You will not touch her, he said, his voice low and dangerous, the voice of the Frostborn King. Lyra laughed, a cold, brittle sound that echoed through the silent garden. You cannot stop me, Kaelin, she said.
I have the Order on my side.
And I have other allies. As she spoke, figures began to emerge from the shadows, surrounding them. They were not members of the Order. They were Frostborn. Lyra's loyalists, those who shared her resentment, her jealousy, her desire for power. Talia felt a wave of despair wash over her. They were trapped, outnumbered, betrayed by one of their own. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes pleading, searching for a way out. His face was grim, but his eyes held a flicker of determination, of defiance. He would not surrender. He would not let them take her. He would fight. He drew his ice blade, the weapon shimmering with an ethereal, blue light. He stood tall, a figure of power and grace, ready to defend himself, to defend her. But even as he prepared for battle, Talia saw something else in his eyes. A flicker of sadness? Regret? He was trapped not by their physical foes, but emotions. He was seemingly beginning to care. Chapter 19. The Fury of Winter. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the soft crunch of snow underfoot and the ragged breathing of those caught in the standoff. Kaelin stood between Talia and the combined forces of Lyra's Frostborn rebels and the Order of the Silver Dawn, his ice blade held aloft, a beacon of defiance in the encroaching darkness. Talia watched him, her heart a painful knot of fear, admiration, and a growing, undeniable affection. She saw the strain on his face, the weariness in his eyes, the burden of leadership and betrayal weighing heavily upon him. But she also saw the unwavering determination, the fierce protectiveness, the spark of the wild, untamed winter that resided within him. This is madness, Lyra, Kaelin said, his voice low and resonant, carrying across the small garden. Stand down. There is still time to avoid bloodshed. Lyra laughed, a cold, brittle sound that sent shivers down Talia's spine. There will be no bloodshed for us, she said, her eyes gleaming with a cruel triumph. You are outnumbered, Kaelin. Surrender the mortal, and the Heart of Winter, and we will let you live. Kaelin's grip tightened on his blade. Never, he said, his voice a deadly whisper. The tension reached a breaking point. One of Lyra's Frostborn rebels, a young male with a sneer on his face, lunged forward, his silver sword aimed at Kaelin. But Kaelin was faster. He moved with an unnatural speed, his ice blade a blur of motion. He parried the attack, the sound of metal on ice echoing through the garden, and with a swift, decisive movement, disarmed his opponent. The battle was joined. The garden erupted in a chaotic melee of flashing blades, swirling snow, and shouted commands. Kaelin fought with a ferocity Talia had never witnessed before, his movements fluid and graceful, his ice blade a deadly extension of his will. He was a whirlwind of ice and fury, deflecting attacks, disarming opponents, protecting Talia with every fiber of his being. Talia, despite her lack of combat training, found herself instinctively using the magic that flowed through her. She focused her will, channeling the power of the Heart of Winter, which Kaelin had entrusted to her, and created a shield of ice around them, deflecting arrows and blows from the Order soldiers. But they were still outnumbered, surrounded by enemies on all sides. Talia could feel her strength waning, her magic flickering, her body tiring. She knew they couldn't hold out forever. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced her arm. She cried out, stumbling backward, her ice shield faltering. An arrow, tipped with silver, had grazed her flesh. Kaelin, seeing her injured, roared with a fury that shook the very ground beneath their feet. The temperature plummeted, the air around them freezing, the snow swirling into a blinding vortex. He unleashed the full power of the winter, his eyes blazing with an icy fire, his body radiating a cold so intense that it froze the very air around him. The Frostborn rebels and the Order soldiers staggered back, their weapons freezing in their hands, their bodies shivering uncontrollably. Lyra, her face pale with shock and fear, watched as Kaelin transformed into something more. Something terrifying and beautiful. He was no longer just the Frostborn king. He was the embodiment of winter itself, a force of nature unleashed. He moved with a speed and power that defied comprehension, his ice blades striking with deadly accuracy, freezing his opponents where they stood. The battle turned. The tide shifted. Kaelin, fueled by his rage, by his love for Talia, by his unwavering commitment to his people, was unstoppable. But even as he fought, Talia saw the toll it was taking on him. The power he was wielding was immense, draining, consuming. He was pushing himself beyond his limits, risking everything to protect her. She knew she had to do something, had to help him, had to end this fight before it destroyed them both. She focused her will, channeling the power of the heart of winter, and unleashed a wave of pure, cold energy that swept across the garden. The remaining Frostborn rebels and Order soldiers were frozen in place, encased in shimmering ice, their weapons falling harmlessly to the ground. Lyra, her eyes wide with terror, stood alone, facing the combined power of Kaelin and Talia. The storm subsided. The silence returned, broken only by the sound of Kaelin's ragged breathing and the faint crackling of the ice that encased their enemies. Kaelin stood before Lyra, his ice blade pointed at her throat, his face a mask of cold fury. He was so furious he could barely speak. He managed only one word. What was it? Chapter 20. The Eternal Spring.
Why?
The single word, raw with pain and betrayal, echoed in the frozen silence of the garden. It wasn't a question seeking information, it was a lament, an expression of the deep wound Lyra had inflicted, not just on him, but on the trust and loyalty that bound the Frostborn together. Lyra didn't answer, her gaze defiant, her body trembling, but not from the cold. Tears, freezing as they trailed down her cheeks, tracked paths through the frost that had begun to form on her skin. She had gambled everything, her loyalty, her honor, her place among her people, and she had lost. Kaelin lowered his blade slightly, the immediate threat lessened, but the fury in his eyes remained. He had spared her life, for now, but the judgment, the consequences of her actions, were yet to come. He turned to Talia, his expression softening, the icy fire in his eyes replaced by a deep concern. He reached out, his hand gently touching the wound on her arm. The arrow had only grazed her, but the silver tip had left a burning, stinging pain. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with a tenderness that belied his formidable power. Talia nodded, managing a weak smile. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice hoarse. "It's just a scratch." Kaelin focused his will, channeling the healing power of the Frostborn. A soft, blue light emanated from his hand, and the cold, soothing energy flowed into Talia's wound. The pain subsided, the bleeding stopped, and the skin began to knit itself back together. He turned his attention to the frozen figures that surrounded them, the remnants of Lyra's rebellion and the Order of the Silver Dawn. With a wave of his hand, he shattered the ice that encased them, freeing them from their frozen prison. The Frostborn rebels, humbled and defeated, knelt before Kaelin, their heads bowed in submission. They had witnessed his power, his fury, and they knew they had been wrong to betray him. The Order soldiers, disoriented and demoralized, were quickly disarmed and bound. They would be dealt with later, according to the laws of Hollowmere and the laws of the Frostborn. Kaelin turned his attention back to Lyra, his expression grim. "You will be judged by your peers," he said, his voice cold and formal. Your fate will be decided by the Council of the Frostborn. He gestured to two of his loyal Frostborn, who had arrived with reinforcements, drawn by the surge of power that had emanated from the battle. They took Lyra into custody, leading her away, her head held high, but her eyes filled with a deep, unyielding sorrow. Kaelin and Talia, left alone in the ravaged garden, stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the battle, the betrayal, the near-death experience, settling upon them. Talia reached out and took Kaelin's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. His touch, as always, was cold, but it sent a warmth through her, a reassurance that they had survived, that they had faced the darkness together, and emerged victorious. "We need to return to Winterhaven," Kaelin said, his voice weary. "We need to regroup, to plan our next move. The Order will not give up so easily. And the heart of winter, it must be protected." Talia nodded, her gaze fixed on the small, wooden box she still clutched in her hand, the box that contained the powerful gem. She knew he was right. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. As they turned to leave, Talia noticed something amidst the trampled snow and shattered ice. A single, white flower, a snowdrop, blooming out of season, its delicate petals unfurled, a symbol of hope, of resilience, of the enduring power of life. She knelt down, gently touching the flower, and a vision flooded her mind. She saw a future where the winter and the mortal world lived in harmony, where the balance had been restored, where the Frostborn and humans coexisted peacefully. She saw a future where she and Kaelin stood side by side, their hands clasped, their hearts united, ruling not as king and consort, but as partners, as equals. The vision faded, leaving her with a sense of peace, of purpose, of a love that transcended the boundaries of their different worlds. It was a love born of shared struggle, of mutual respect, of a connection that had been forged in the crucible of betrayal and battle. A love that would conquer the cold. It was also a love that would endure. It was almost eternal. But one question remained. What about Thomas? Epilogue. The image of Thomas, his kind eyes, his gentle smile, his strong embrace, flickered through Talia's mind, a bittersweet pang of loss and love. It was a memory she would always cherish, a part of her that would never fade. But it was a memory, a ghost of the past, while Kaelin was her present, her future, the unexpected, undeniable love that had bloomed in the heart of winter. She had grieved, had mourned, had believed her heart would forever remain frozen in the sorrow of Thomas's passing. But Kaelin, with his quiet strength, his fierce protectiveness, his surprising vulnerability, had thawed the ice, had awakened a part of her she thought long dead. She looked at Kaelin, his silver eyes reflecting the faint light of the rising sun, his face etched with weariness, but also with a newfound peace. She saw the love in his eyes, the unspoken promise of a future together, a future she now embraced with open arms. The return to Winterhaven was a quiet affair. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the long road to restoring the balance between the realms remained. Lyra's betrayal had shaken the Frostborn, but it had also strengthened their resolve, reminding them of the importance of unity and trust. The captured Order soldiers were dealt with justly, their threat contained, their secrets revealed. The heart of winter, secured in a place of power within Winterhaven, became a focal point of Talia's training. With Alara's journal as her guide and Kaelin's patient tutelage, she learned to harness its power, to control the elements, to heal the land, to communicate with the spirits of nature. She discovered a strength within herself she never knew existed, a connection to the ancient magic that flowed through her veins. She was no longer just Talia Corvin, the retired librarian from Hollowmere. She was Talia, the guardian of the balance, the bridge between the worlds, the woman who had captured the heart of the Frostborn king. The seasons changed, as they always did, but the unnatural chill that had gripped Hollowmere gradually receded. The snow melted, the flowers bloomed, the birds returned, and life, slowly but surely, returned to the town. The people of Hollowmere, initially fearful and suspicious of Talia's transformation, gradually came to accept her, to respect her, to see her as their protector, their link to the magical realm that existed alongside their own. Years passed. Not that Talia noticed. Time, as Kaelin had warned, flowed differently for her now. The lines between the mortal world and the realm of winter blurred, and she moved between them with ease, fulfilling her role as guardian, as protector, as a bridge between two worlds. She and Kaelin ruled together, not as king and consort, but as partners, as equals, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of connection, of understanding, of bridging the divides that separated them. They built a future together, a future rooted in respect, in trust, in a love that defied the boundaries of their different worlds. A future that looked to endure. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned golden and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves, Talia and Kaelin stood on the shores of Mirror Lake, now shimmering and clear, reflecting the vibrant colors of the setting sun. Talia, her hair now streaked with silver, a testament to the passage of time and the magic she wielded, leaned against Kaelin, his arm wrapped around her waist, his touch still sending a thrill through her, even after all these years. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaelin asked, his voice a low murmur, his gaze fixed on the distant peaks of the Whisperwood Mountains. "Leaving your old life behind? Choosing this uncertain future?" Talia smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "Never," she said, her voice firm, filled with a love that had only deepened with time. "I found my true home, Kaelin. With you. In this world. In this love." She turned to face him, her hand reaching up to caress his cheek, her fingers tracing the faint lines that time and experience had etched upon his face. "I miss Thomas. Yes," she admitted, her voice soft, acknowledging the lingering echo of her past love. "But I also love you. And that love, it doesn't diminish what I had. It expands it. It makes it eternal." Kaelin's silver eyes, filled with a love that mirrored her own, met hers. He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of a bond that had weathered storms, overcome betrayals, and transcended the boundaries of life and death, of mortal and magical. It wasn't so much a kiss, but a vow. As they stood there, embraced by the beauty of the setting sun, by the magic of the mountains, by the enduring power of their love, Talia knew that she had found her true destiny, her eternal spring, in the heart of winter. A destiny, a life, a love. It would never end. The end.